And I'm very excited and pleased to welcome a very special guest. It's one of my there are two people who I look to for sort of comments about the state of the culture and sanity and where we all are. I'm not going to say who the other one is because I want everybody out there who knows me to think I'm obviously talking about them. But the first one is my guest today, the great Ben Dreyfuss, journalist, commentator, prolific tweeter, and a keeper of a Substack called appropriately "Calm Down" here on Substack, which he doesn't write nearly often and he doesn't write in nearly often enough, which we will get to in the course of this conversation. Um, Ben, how are you? I
I'm
think you're
I'm
great.
great. Thank you so much for having me.
Where do we find you now? You live in Washington at this point?
I moved to Washington D.C. a few months ago, just because I wanted to see what it was like to live in a city that was, so hates Trump. And when he came back, I was like, it sounds a little like it sounds a little like Paris sent to the Nazis. Not that Trump's a Nazi literally, but like it just feels like this city hates him. And so it just sounded like something I couldn't pass up the opportunity to ensconce myself in.
That is a great. I mean, running towards the fire is what journalists are supposed to do. So it doesn't feel like you're living in Trump town. You're living in sort of
No,
resistance town.
it does feel like, yeah. So like when he was president the first time, I lived in New York and would come down to because I was the editorial director at Brother Jones, and I would come down to our DC office every few months, and everyone there was it's an incredibly liberal city, and so they were all very constantly upset. And then when I came out here as sort of like an exploratory drill last September, and all of the people I know here were like, Ben, yeah. It's a wonderful city. It's a wonderful city. But don't come here if Trump wins because we're all going to be so sad that there will be no fun. And I was like, oh, it does sound a bit like the
that's
Blitz, though. Like that's what I
that's the time to
want.
be there.
I
Yeah.
want to see what it run towards the fire, man.
So are people sneaking back into their apartments before they get rounded up
Yeah,
and
it is.
the wagons kind of is everybody on the street? I mean, I imagine the brows in DC are kind of furrowed in the best of times.
A lot of
Uh,
furrows.
but
When I was looking for my apartment, a number of the like landlords in the buildings, when I would go look at them, would be like, "Oh yeah, this one's open. They just got judged. They were
they,
thrown out. Had
they
to move on
well
back to Iowa."
left all their belongings behind, and they um one thing I noticed about Washington D.C. in my visits there is the prominence of name tags. I don't think there's a city where more people wear name tags more often, which I don't disapprove of. It is helpful. Have you noticed that?
I have noticed it, and they also all dress in the exact same way. Like it's a very bad fashion city. They're all wearing like suits that are oversized a little bit, a little too big. It's not they say it's like Hollywood for ugly people, but it's also Hollywood for like but poorly dressed people.
Dockers, I imagine, does a huge percent of their business there in Washington. Um, tell me, I've never heard I know pieces of your story and how you got here, but how did you come to how did it happen that you became this sort of
Well,
freewheeling, floating cultural commentator out there?
so I after I went to NYU for writing and politics because I wanted my father to love me and he loved politics. And then afterwards, but I didn't my heart wasn't really in it. And so minute I graduated in 2008, which was a wonderful time to do that. I moved to Los Angeles to become a movie star because I'd been told about nepotism. And I was like, I'll just inherit this. I'll just be a movie
You
star.
can
And
you you can take all the reboots of your father's films
yeah,
and
exactly. I was like, it'll just be easy. And then, to my great shock and displeasure. This did not happen.
How much of a shot did you give it at movie stardom? You
I gave it only like 2 years. Then I was like, all
Yeah.
right.
But
Well,
did you
I
get
mean,
you get
I gave.
headshots and an agent
Oh
and
yes,
all this
I
stuff?
did headshots and I did all that. I did like the bad AFI short films, and then eventually the reason why the 2 years went up is that I sort of like ran out of money and was like, oh Jesus, I better get health insurance too. And my sister had um, gone into journalism right after college, and she was working at CNET and told me that they had a job that was about to be posted but hadn't been posted yet. And if I applied first, I
Hmm.
might be able to get it. And so I was like the first person to apply for this very silly job called social media editor.
And it was first come first serve for
It was
these.
it was basically like I then got it and ended up spending a few years there. And my boss told me that he was like, "No, Ben, your application was good. You beat the 5 people who knew to apply before we posted it." And I was like,
Oh.
"Oh, that doesn't seem impressive." But then that happened, and it turned. I moved to New York and became a journalist, and then left and went to Mother Jones and became a real journalist. It became my life. And now, a decade later, my hair is gray. I'm a little fatter, and I'm stuck in this life as a journalist.
Are you open to returning to movie stardom if offered?
Is anyone on? Yes, yes.
Okay. If anyone out there is casting, I by the
I
way,
did get.
I'm open to that too.
Yeah,
If you're
I
looking
did
for.
get to play young Bernie Madoff on ABC when my dad was playing Bernie Madoff because I'm uniquely qualified to be young Richard Dreyfuss.
Very nice. So then, tell me about your journalism career and how that developed and how.
I went to CNET and spent 2 years at the right time to be doing social media as your foot in the door. And all I was allowed to do was rewrite headlines basically for cell phone reviews. And you learn a lot when that's all you're allowed to do because you learn how people read and what gets them to click, really. And I then I then decided to leave and ended up at Mother Jones, where they somewhat made the mistake of thinking that I was a real editor. And so they were like, you can do all the headline stuff, but also here are some stories if you want to edit them. And I was like, um,
And
and
I mean
yeah,
that's kind of the editorial process at every major publication right now. Just sort of find a guy and throw some copy at him and see what happens.
right. And at the time, you could really like if you owned it's not true anymore, but at the time in 2013, if you controlled a publication's Facebook page, you had complete power to restructure the organization by deciding what to post.
that
So, so like if I didn't like us, people had to pitch stories for me to promote them on Facebook, and so if I didn't like them, they wouldn't get promoted, and naturally people would then go, all right, I'm going to write a story that appeals to Ben.
the this is I was in the early days of the internet. I was I worked on the at the website of the Los Angeles Times, and they the first time that when I got there, uh, the Drudge Report didn't link to LA Times articles because the whole site was paywalled, and he objected to that, and then the paywall went down, and at some point he linked to an article, and it became the biggest story of the day. And it was kind of a random like weather story or something like that, and the the uh the page one meeting got where they heard the rankings of what was happening when they found out this sort of insignificant article was the top was the most clicked article on the site was very outraged, and people suggested that we could is there a way we can prevent Drudge from linking to our stories again? Was that was he was not reading the LA Times properly, and I don't know if they actually suggested that we send someone to train him how to read the LA Times, but that was certainly the spirit. But then eventually, people as it sort of got out that this internet thing was here to stay, uh, people started wanting uh, their Drudge link and sort of all campaigning like, can you submit this to Drudge? Can we send this in? Uh, anyway,
Well, there was a, I will never forget that, like, when I was at CNET was owned by CBS at the time. And there was a guy at CBS News who was, he was, the rainmaker. He was known throughout the company as the man who made the traffic. And he came and spoke to me and my boss this time in New York. And his secret to make it rain at CBS News was that he had figured out how to game a social network which no longer exists called Stumble Upon.
yeah.
And
Oh, yeah. I remember that. That was,
yeah,
yeah. All these things had their little moments where it was like,
yeah. And
stumble
he
upon is a thing that's gonna.
and he, I remember, like, his Instagram was always filled with him, like, getting sent first class to Japan to do talks, and I was like, oh, that's the dream. But then, of course, Stumble Upon, like, they changed it and it stopped working around the time when I was working there, and instantly that guy was fired. Like,
and then
he had
and then
not
moved on
written
to
anything.
dig or
Yeah, exactly.
dog dog pile
He's
or
probably shot himself by now, but
yeah.
he like had not gleaned anything about the larger industry. He had just learned about Stumble Upon. So when Stumble Upon went, his patron was gone.
That
And
was it.
so me and my boss spent the entire time being like, look, this social media thing is going to last forever. We need to learn how to, like, survive once Facebook and Twitter all fall apart. And so then that worked out, and I eventually Mother Jones had been successful enough to become the editorial director. And but what I did was all these terrible things where I convinced people to care about politics in these very partisan ways that somewhat made me uncomfortable. And I decided to leave, to go on book leave, to write a book about, you know, um, I have done the tricks. I know the dark art. Let me tell you about the inside story. And while I was on book leave, I then got a note that was like, "We've just you're don't come back." And I became an anchor and ended up on Substack.
The so did you were you because you found your voice most of all I feel like on Twitter is where because you respond to you're such an omnivore able to respond to so many different things, having go up and come up with quick and sharp and hilarious, but also very incisive opinions about from the latest Marvel movie to what's wrong what's wrong with how they're doing the conclave this year or whatever. the did you instantly discover Twitter was where you belonged or connect to it
Twitter,
or
Twitter is built for my brain. It's one of those things that it's just a perfect thing of grabbing these AED thoughts, and I have a lot of, like, 101 level knowledge of things, and then in some I have like maybe a 201 level, but it works out well for it, and it's also just quippy and fast. And the thing that I loved about Twitter, and the thing that I still love about it, is that I when I was in college, I studied English, and I wrote like a gay poet from the 19th century.
Mhm.
I stylized it in this way that people don't really talk. And what I learned on Twitter is that it's better to write the way you talk. And so it really made me a better writer, and I do owe I do owe a lot to that.
Well, you're fortunate if you don't talk like a pompous, self-important stuff shirt like myself. So,
Oh no,
so
you're
I
quite good at Twitter as well. That's how we met. You're quite good at it.
it's very love hate with the medium and my own voice on it and you the internal struggles well up too often there. But thank you. Um, That, by the way, all the folks coming in, joining our lunch here with the great Ben Dreyfuss, please submit your questions. Ben is qualified to answer about literally any topic on earth. So submit your question, comments, heckles, shoot us down. So let's get into the culture here. So this is something you deal with a lot, but what the hell is wrong with everybody? What?
I mean, they are. It's people have gone mad, right? And
Yes, on all sides.
yeah, I do think it's a lot of social media's fault, to be honest. Like, I think that people aren't really prepared in their brains in the great course of human history to have this much um constant stream of awareness of the rest of the world. And the other thing about social media is that not only are you responding to news stories, every news story that happens in Abilene, Texas, or anywhere in the world, but you're also responding to the response that other people have. And it just makes people sad or crazy or paranoid because they're seeing people who are maybe being interpreted at their worst, which is what neurons was media. And so everyone becomes, afraid that there's monsters under the bed and in the closets. When in reality, when you're in real life, you notice that, like my takeaway from real life is that
Yeah.
people are generally quite nice. But on social media, people aren't quite nice. So everyone goes a little crazy and becomes very groupy, and cognitive bias makes everyone
The yeah, and it's. I mean, I said something like 98% of the the posts on Twitter are written by 2% of the people, or something like that.
right.
And of that 2%, it's like 2%, a tiny sliver. So my feeling about social media has always been it is really like the most people. So it's the super duper mega users that rule it, the people that can do it. And not speaking for yourself, but I think within that demographic, uh sociopaths index extremely high, and if not psychopaths, and everything. So that we've turned the control of our culture over to this medium that elevates kind of the weirdest, freakish, most unpleasant, unhappy people, uh, that there are. So, what kind of mixed feelings you have about being so good at a medium that that that
I
that
I hate it. I hate it. I had a girl a former girlfriend of mine. Like the experience of going on Instagram is finding the exes of yours got married, and I my the last girlfriend I had when I was living in LA recently got married, and I was looking at her Instagram, and she'd married some who the hell knows, some executive in LA. And I was looking at their
what a
wedding
fool.
photos. Yeah. But I was like, look at how happy they look. And then a few moments later, I kept scrolling and I saw a girlfriend that I had a few years ago, who's also a journalist, and she'd married someone who's a communist in Brooklyn or whatever, and they were wearing dreads and they looked unhappy, and I was like, oh God, if only someone had cut me out of this goddamn career and just like thrown the phone in the river originally and said, I do think that there is, I have a very love-hate relationship with it. I know it's bad for my mental health, and it's bad for everyone's mental health. But then at the same time, it gave me the very small amount of fame that I have.
You seem like so. A lot of Twitter super users that I've talked to, and we've never spoken IRL before. Does this count as IRL?
I think so. Nowadays it
Subsect Live?
does.
Okay, as close as we're gonna get probably in our lives.
Oh, you
Uh,
think? You might think.
I don't exist outside of live video lunches. So, but no, but mu many seem to who are Twitter super users are almost catatonic when you try to speak to them in a non-written medium. And yeah, I found that, but you seem to express yourself freely and speak as fluently as you do online there. Why do you think that is for you, and why do you think others
Uh,
are
I
unable to?
I do 100% agree with you, and I think that one of the reasons is that I used to constantly try to make my Twitter an honest trailer for what the live show is like, you know? But I was like, if you know me on Twitter, it might be a little different when you meet me in real life, but the DNA is the same. Like I'm not
Yeah.
a different person. And this was a big problem when I first entered journalism because they were, at CBS they had all these like standards and everything, and they would constantly complain about my personal account. And it's so bizarre to say this, but I had at the time a somewhat inflated and false sense that because my dad is who he was, I didn't need to be afraid of getting fired. And so I was like, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be me. And then, I found out that my dad had wasted all of his money and we were all poor. And I was like, oh my God, now I desperately need these jobs. But like, it did lead to it so that I used Twitter in a way that was organic. It was how I talk. It's how I chat. It's fun to get to meet people and do things like that. But I don't use it strategically the way I would advise other people to do, because it's also led to a lot of problems for me.
So my example of this phenomenon is during my brief stay at Gawker. When I was in the New York office, I was sitting next to an editor of one of the Gawker sites, who will remain nameless, gone on to great renown and infamy. But I had a question about how you did something on the CMS. So I turned to her and said, "How do you do this thing on the CMS?" And she kept typing, didn't look up, so I thought she didn't hear me. So I repeated the question, and she kept typing, didn't look over me. And I looked back at my computer, and she had DM'd me the answer to my question. If she had written the answer to my question, but couldn't look up. So
No, I mean it is true that they are more comfortable with that, and I think there's something to like, Plato used to like. Uh, I always think of this thing about with like Plato, where like Plato didn't like the oral tradition because the oral tradition was people memorizing stories and just saying them rote without thinking about them. And what he wanted was more, people actually thinking about stuff and doing them. And when you when you use social media or something like that, or when you and I are talking right now, it's extemporaneous and we're all just like on the spot. But if you're going to overly think about something and you're going to think about it in this delivered sense, it does create it creates a false safety net, I guess. And so then you have people who are more comfortable talking in Slack because they have a time to second guess themselves, which is probably
yeah,
smart for them, but it's also less fun.
yeah, yeah. If you can rewind the real life and edit
Yeah.
your statements as you go along, that would be quite
My
a
favorite thing
gift.
about Slack is that there's this running thing where people are obsessed with the New York Times internal media drama. And whenever a good media reporter writes about the New York Times, they always mention the Slack emojis that went on because apparently the New York Times staffers are obsessed with these like Slack emojis that they say like be like a knife emojis and stuff.
So it's not just happy face
No,
or
it's like
shrugging shoulders, but
yeah, like
they,
Barry Weiss had a favorite when she left. When she left the New York Times, her thing had like, yeah, and then I kept getting all these hangman emojis. And then I started to notice it, and all of the things where apparently the New York Times, that's how they talk, is just in emojis. And I do remember Mother Joe's constantly like sitting in an office with 10 people, but then you would realize that there would be like a loud sound on someone's computer, and they would all be responding to this other Slack chat, and then you go, ooh. And you were like, oh, this is worlds within worlds of people going insane and getting themselves wrapped up in nonsense.
yeah, there should be a cap on the number of people allowed on a Slack, so that you
Yeah.
can that so it can only suck you in so much. When you have a 10,000 person organization and they're all living on Slack, that
Yeah.
uh,
That is just, that's how you end up with heads on pitchforks.
we had a question a little bit ago from our own Abby Bart asked. So what celebrity do you think should be become pope, and you have what are your feelings about the conclave in general?
I
How should we be picking a pope right now? How
I think that we should let the Catholics do it. And as a
we
Jew,
us
I'm gonna leave.
as two Jews on Substack Live, you don't think we have a right to determine the next?
I'm also like very bad about knowing which branch of Christianity a Christian is. So my first thought was like, well, if Bruce Willis didn't have his issues, he'd be great, you know. He'd be John McClane would really get in there, but I'm not sure if that's the right branch of Christianity.
uh,
Mel, who is a lovely guy in person, I think probably shouldn't be.
should what you would not you in a secret ballot you would not cast yours for.
No, a very lovely person. I've met him, but maybe he's got a lot
Mark
of
Wahlberg.
issues.
Mark Wahlberg is a very active Catholic and very vocal in the church. Do you think he'd make a good pope?
People like him a lot. He does have that history of the fights in Boston, but who from Boston doesn't? And I think that he would be worth considering.
Interesting. Is there a female celebrity you'd like to see as pope, or do you think we're ready for a
Woman?
female pope? Yeah.
No.
They, the
No, I mean, I as a secular Jew think that women should be allowed to be pope.
the
I don't know that they're quite fond of it.
you would does it bother you that Jews don't have a pope? Would you like a pope?
I did find it confusing growing up that we didn't
Yeah.
have one.
That
That
there
I
was
was like,
no one in
who's in
charge.
charge? Who's the
Yeah.
ultimate person in charge? And the answer is always, well, yeah, whoever.
God is in charge.
Yeah, God is
But
in charge.
so, um, you're talking about the New York Times. You write a lot about the state of media and journalism right now. And so tell me what do you how do you rate the journalism profession 2025 and the job they're doing?
I think that it's an interesting time. I mean, you have to somewhat segregate the journalism that is proper reporting, I think, from then what I do, which is just kind of commenting on stuff. And though I'm a commenter who comments on stuff, I think that there's probably not enough of the reporting, um, which I think has a lot of value. Like the reporting actually does have value, and also my comments have value, and columnists like you have value.
Thank
But
you.
the
Columnists like me
yeah, yeah, call you
or
specifically,
columnists who are
columnists,
me.
yeah. But I do think that like it's been inflated with the take economy is inflated, so there's inflation in the take economy now, and it's all overridden by these absolute disgusting morons on social media who don't know what they're talking about and should be poisoned with rat poison.
And
Um,
do you feel like the New York Times though is doing a good job? Do you feel like your Mother Jones is doing a good job? Your
well, I
friend
haven't
Lloyd.
read Mother Jones since I left because I'm spiteful, but I
Yeah.
do think that the New York Times is a fantastic organization that gets way too much hate online, and that the fact that it has been able to survive the last 2 decades of journalism economics and to still do the daily work that it does is somewhat of a miracle. And I think there's a lot of places. I mean, I think the Atlantic is great. I think that there's a lot, and also I mean, the Angler is a great example of this, right? Like of a new model, not a new model, but like you know, for a long time the trades in Hollywood were one specific thing, and I do think there's wonderful stuff going on in all of these. It's just that everything gets flattened in this awful world of digital online broadcast where um activists and columnists and reporters are all flattened into the discourse. And the discourse then has all these toxic assets
Yeah.
that are useless. And so then you miss the good shit.
Well, once you get into the discourse as a reporter, as a commentator, that's what your job is, to interact with the discourse and everything. But as a reporter, once you're thinking about the discourse, then you're not just looking at where the facts take you. You're thinking about, oh, Does this stray from what people are saying? Do I want to stray from what people are saying? How should this piece be answering this narrative that's going on? And when you get in your head with that stuff, it's really hard to just say, okay, what happened at this meeting that I'm writing about?
Totally. I mean, it's sort of like the equivalent of making a movie versus doing a play, right? Like when you make a movie, you do it and then you decide what you've done, and 7 months later, you find out if people liked it. But when you're doing a play, every night you hear the audience respond, and you can't help. I mean, I mean, it's one of the joys for actors of doing plays, but it's also like you end up following the laugh line, right? And like
Yeah.
you lean into that immediate audience and his audience capture. And it might work in acting and in drama and plays, but it doesn't really work as well in journalism.
So one talk about a second a couple of times that you pointed out where journalism has sort of followed these narratives. What one on the less serious side, you wrote a fantastic column on Substack called "Europe Sucks," and which you start which there was a narrative uh, that was developing in a whole bunch of stories about how American tourists were using Europe. And you wrote Europe thinks it's so special, but it is not. They don't even know how to make iced coffee in Europe, a drink that has two ingredients, both of which are in the name. And then when how do narratives like this, like American tourists are ruining Europe, how do they take hold and how do they
I guess it
shape
comes
film?
about. I think that specific one comes about because like people in Europe, obviously, like they're writing for people in Europe who are probably quite annoyed with American tourists because they're
Yeah,
NIMBY Europeans who want to walk on cobblestone streets. And then these Americans come and they also focus on the worst ones of them. But in reality, like people in Europe, I think broadly and generally, quite like American tourists to come. That's why they have tourism. That's why they try and get us to come. And so what really happens is then all the tabloids and all the things start to seek the most incendiary opinion so that they can become the number one person within a small niche. And it becomes sort of audience capture for the loudest type of person who's interested in that. And you see it on you see it in other types of journalism all the time. Before before we went live, we were talking about how in December the left decided that it was fun to assassinate people,
yeah.
and it was
And
my friend Taylor Lorenz was on something recently, and she described how when she was doing that in December and was doing all the stuff that I profoundly disagreed with, and it was getting a lot of hate from the Brad universe. Her actual readership growth went higher than ever, and that's because for any individual creator, of course, tapping into a small niche is going to be huge because the world
yeah,
is huge. But it just doesn't lead to really any broad truths about what people actually believe in an important sense. It's just you found a small subset of psychotics who don't want Americans to come to Rome or do want to kill healthcare workers.
that is interesting, and we find that in our way here when we write about a subset of a profession that no one ever writes about, we get a bunch of subscriptions because people are excited. But yeah, on the other end of that, when you cater to a certain form of psychosis, then partisans of that form there. But we were talking about that you and refer to we were talking about how there was that Luigi moment happened. Blue Sky had been had been going through this huge explosion for about 3 weeks there, 2 or 3 weeks when that happened. When everybody was saying, "Okay, look at this! It's a new social network that doesn't have to be toxic. It doesn't have to be nasty. It can be inclusive, and we don't have to have all the horrible people." And then suddenly it became a pro assassination site. Not only with a million people tweeting like, "Yes, great, let's kill. Who else can we kill now?" But then anybody who objected to this was like, "Get this person who's anti-assassination off the site," and it was I think the growth that you look at the growth charts, it just stopped dead. Everybody, oh, all right, well, we're here again.
Yeah, I mean,
Uh,
also it's so funny that they started it with that, where they're like, finally, we found the place, we found Eden. It's gonna be good after 20 years of social media networks. We finally found the one that's good, even though product wise it's the exact same as Twitter. And like like every single message board in history where people have done this, the second people join, it devolves into internecine fights. People being like, ban them off, kick them off.
but I was remembering back to I heard a good friend and he was a very funny tweeter, Josh Elvis Weinstein. It was a mystery science theater writer, and talking on a podcast the other day, remembering the early days of Twitter when it really was just sort of the funniest commentators and a lot of comedians and people doing weird, sort of very, very nichey takes. I remember Queen Hobo was that and all kinds of funny cat pictures. And it really did feel like just a that's kind of what's so disappointing about what it became, because it really felt like it was it was a fun place to be. Now I was covering American Idol at the time, and I noticed when I would celebrate the victory one week of someone who the dominant American Idol fans didn't like, I would get a thousand tweets like wishing for my death and so that was always out there early on, but the big narrative was very so to see it go away from that was a real heartbreak, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's two reasons, two main reasons. There's lots of individual reasons, but there's two big things that happened that sort of ruined Twitter in that from that golden era. One of them is the Gamergate slash Trump moment. Not even blaming Trump specifically, but like it just politicized it in a new way. And also the larger structural thing is just that everyone got too many followers. So everyone was one retweet away from a group of people who they just genuinely don't wouldn't be friends with in the real world. And so people became outraged about everything. And if you got retweeted by one account, you suddenly would then be thrown into this universe where you look like a monster and they look like a monster if it happens to you. And that wasn't true in 2008 and 2009 when most of the accounts were small enough so that there was individual sorting preferences, so that people who had a sense of humor would follow people with senses of humor. But then at some point it became people who were like, my God, humor. Don't you know? Don't you know about mass shootings and all the terror in the world? And you're like, oh, Jesus,
I
we're
mean, that's the
talking in
irony
different ways.
that this platform that was primarily about humor became the enforcement mechanism by which comedy was banned
Yeah.
for a while from from our culture. So that would not have predicted that at the beginning at all. By the way,
I remember in 2017, right around this time in 2017, when liberal media we were going through some stuff. And I wrote something that was joking. Some stupid blog post on my Jones. I got this message from my boss, the editor in chief, and she was like, "Ben," it was at like 2 in the morning. It was like a late night, and she was like, "Ben, this is too funny. You need to be able to read the room. No, no one is in the mood for jokes." And I was like, "Okay, are you sure?" She said, "Stop talking, stop talking. New rule for you: no jokes until further notice." And I was like, I don't really know what else I have other than jokes, but okay. And so then like a week went by and I kept waiting for to get a note from her that was like jokes are okay again, and it never came. And so about like 6 weeks later, I was like, I'm just going to assume. You know, assume jokes are all right
right. Who are writers besides present company included? Who are writers you like? Who are the people that you read and follow yourself? And What do you
Josh
enjoy out there?
Barrow is one of my favorite writers. I think that Matt Iglesias is great. I think Ezra Klein is great. I think Sonny Bunch is great. Um, Sonny Bunch is one of my favorite Hollywood.
He is terrific.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that's there's obviously more people, but those are the ones that immediately come to mind.
Yeah. Who do you whose tweets do you think you end up liking the most? Who are Twitter followers that Twitter
People who are nice to me and say nice things.
the, that that's how,
I do think
uh,
I also, I mean, I think that it's probably a very similar group. Like Sunny and I have a very similar sort of like tone on it. So I end up constantly not only liking his tweets, but then DMing him and being like, "You stole my idea. I was gonna say something like that."
has anyone sued? Has there been a Twitter plagiarism lawsuit? Has that?
So I found so one time a few years ago, someone found out that I had done some joke on Twitter that had gone viral at some point, and then someone messaged me, and they were like, "This Canadian journalist has been using your joke," and like it had gone viral in Canada, and I didn't know he was like a writer for the Globe and Star, or whatever it's called in Toronto, and I then went on like a 6 months crusade against that person and just kept tweeting about, "Oh, you're a plagiarist. You never only do this once. People need to look into this guy." I do think that I mean I didn't sue him. Obviously, he's Canadian. I don't know how you serve him. But like uh, I
Beyond
I
the
think
reach of justice, of Twitter
yeah,
justice.
it would be hard to I guess to show damages that like someone stole your tweet.
Yeah. What you'd have to what is the value of a tweet to be to
Right.
be
Right.
to be so? By the way, we are coming into the home stretch here, so get your questions, comments, heckles, all that in right now. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about what's one of your major subjects, which is you are a man of the left, but the annoyingness of the left is a frequent topic of yours.
Yeah, they drive me crazy.
Yeah, talk about that.
Well, I guess like I used to think I was on the left because I was an Obama supporter, right? And like I thought I came of age in that thing where I thought that was the left. And then about 10 years ago, I was at a party in Brooklyn and someone said to me, we were having some argument about some bullshit. And these people in this party said to me, "Oh, I bet you're a capitalist." And I said, "Of course I'm a capitalist. What do you mean? This isn't commie Russia. We're all
Mhm.
capitalists, aren't we?" And they all scoffed and laughed. And I was like, what are they talking about? And that's when I discovered that there was a whole other part of the left that I didn't even know about, that I thought you know, we had defeated a long time ago. And I'm definitely not a part of that left. And that's when I sort of began this somewhat movement to the right, where now I think I'm rather centristy. And I think Joe Manchin should have been the nominee, right? Like
That's fairly centrist.
I
Well,
just think
Jen,
that
so,
the left goes too far. The left goes too far. They're embarrassing. I think they should leave and go start the Communist Party. They make it harder for normal, sane people to live.
our own Janice Min asks, who should be the next Democrat to run for president? Who would get you the most excited if they were the Democratic nominee?
I am waiting to see. I mean, I love Mayor Pete. Like Mayor Pete is really like he seemed designed to appeal to my brain. But I also would want to see him. I want them to win. So I want to see polls where a lot of them. I would want them to nominate someone who could at least make inroads with, the light red state governor type people. Josh Shapiro seems nice too. And I'm a Jew,
The
so I'd be a good Jew.
the so what do you this was a subject I took on with Megan Down last week. Um, you talk about the excesses of the left. How do we balance that with the concern about these excesses and the fact that we do have I think we all have an obligation to point out when our own side crosses lines and everything. And that is how you determine the health of a movement, how much it enforces its side. But how do you balance that against, we have a Mad King who is setting America on fire?
Yeah, I mean, it's
how
hard.
do,
People have been saying to me for years, like, that I don't complain about Republicans enough, I guess. And it's not that I don't disagree with Trump about virtually everything, but like, it's just that I'm not a Republican, So it doesn't annoy me in the same way because like I don't have any expectations for Trump. And also I don't really understand what the utility is of like, there's all these people in the nation and Mother Jones and everywhere online where they just spend all of their time whining about the right. And like, what utility does that have? The right isn't going to listen to you.
yeah,
But there's something to be said, I think, for like the virtue of talking to your own side because at least then you're coming to it from at least ideally a place of first principles, shared first principles. And that like maybe there's a 1 in 20 million chance that if I just complain about one bad thing that the left does, it'll change one mind. And if I just complain about Trump all the time, that's not going to happen. There's no one's ever going to give a shit
it's not going to
because
change any mind.
yeah, no, everyone knows I don't like Trump. Like, there's nothing
And
left
any
to be said.
and anyone who likes Trump probably doesn't follow you. So
Oh, totally. Well, actually, I have quite a lot of, of conservative followers because
how do
I will give them this: is that conservatives, I have found there are a lot of there's a lot of ones who are obviously, but a lot of like the center right types and a little further than that do understand my sense of humor, which is somewhat of a gift and a curse, I guess. But like people used to constantly tell me that like Ben, but for politics, you and Trump would probably get along. I do sort of like see. I get his humor. I do think he's a funny guy. But I also think that his politics are disgusting and he's a racist.
um the in our final moments here, I saw you like Thunderbolts.
I did like
What?
Thunderbolts a lot, even though it's a story about how friendship is the real superpower. I did really like it. It was the best MCU one that I've seen, aside from Deadwood versus Wolverine, and Dead Man, Deadpool, whatever it's
Yeah.
called. In a few years, which is good because we need them to be good. They're the ones that are supposed to keep the guns out of the theater owners' mouths.
What else do you like? What do you watch? What are you seeing? What do you hope they
There
would make?
There is a show on Paramount Plus that I really love right now, and it's called Mobland with
See,
Tom
I
Hardy.
wanted to watch that. That's good cast there.
Yeah, it started out as a like spin-off of Ray Donovan, which was a wonderful show, but then they sort of like changed it. But it has the same DNA, and it's quickly become sort of my favorite streaming show. But yeah, I think that's the thing I'm currently high on.
What's the last movie you really love? What was your favorite movie last year?
Of the last year, oh, it's so hard to do that, isn't it? Because like, you know what movie I thought this isn't my favorite movie, but I do think it didn't get enough credit was Roadhouse 2024.
Let's give
You
it.
know, it was better made. What's his name? The guy Doug Liman is a good director, and he
Yep.
really sold it.
The you know what? I meant to watch it. I need to get back to watch that. So sold me in this. Okay. Final question for you. It's the final Rushfield lunch question. Uh, your career has taken a circuitous path to a very interesting place. But what advice would you give to young Ben going into media today? What do you tell
Oh,
them?
I have to go into media.
Unfortunately, so yes. Why- you can say run and
I mean, I would tell young Ben to try to stop 9/11.
okay,
Invest in Apple, and do your best to warn about 9/11. But aside from that, what I would say is don't be the stumble upon guy. Don't
don't.
become good at one thing that then is ephemeral and goes away. Don't, and like you see it with these Trump people, like a lot of these like people who are making a lot of money because they're Trump Trump apologist. You know, you can suck daddy's dick as long as you want, but eventually he's term limited. Like you're gonna then need something else, and it's best to learn what you can and try to extract it so that it'll survive once the world evolves as it does.
Cool. Uh, Ben Dreyfuss. The blog is Calm Down, not the blog. The
The
newsletter,
Substack,
the
yeah.
Substack is Calm Down, which I hope I as I say I don't feel you can you I feel I love your Twitter work, but I also love your long reads there,
Thank
and
you.
so, you know, set aside a few hours a week
I'm gonna do it
put the
today. You put me on the
I would
spot, and I'm going to.
then I will be the first one to heart the new post or sub or message or whatever it is. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you'll come again.
Thank you for having me.
Good, great talking to you, Ben. Take care.
Bye.